We are now live streaming, so we are ready to go whenever everyone else is. Don't forget the microphone. Sorry, we can't hear you on Zoom if you don't have the microphone. I apologize. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Kastner. I am president of Cambridge Strategic Services, which is part of the firm that has been hired to do strategic planning. My colleague here, Dr. Frank Morgan, and I are going to lead this tonight, and we're going to talk to you about this process. We've had an opportunity to meet with the school board, and they know what this process is all about. I would hope that you would find that the title here, Stakeholder-Driven Strategic Planning, we are practicing that because we're talking about a model that's going to involve both internal and external members of your community in developing a plan that will lead to something that the board and the superintendent can use that will be the basis of the direction for this school district. But first, I'd like you to hear from your superintendent.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Julius Lawson, superintendent of Ames Community School District. Approximately 1 year ago, I started my journey into Ames Community Schools. And during that time, I started to read and learn quite a bit. I started with the surveys completed by the search firm who were working on the superintendent search. As I made my way into the district, had the opportunity to speak with multiple stakeholder groups, have some conversation with the board, and what I heard was that there was a desire for more clarity and convergence as it relates to the district's work. So once I actually made my way all the way into the district beginning July 1, I had the opportunity to talk a little bit more in depth to groups, and what I heard was more of the same. So with that, I started to work with the folks here at the district office team, and we decided to enlist our friends over at Cambridge, Drs. Morgan and Drs. Kastner, to get us started in the strategic planning work. And Dr. Kastner stole a little bit of my thunder because I was going to talk about the stakeholder engagement process, but they will get a little bit more in depth about what the process looks like. And so I hope that you are able to learn about the process, and I hope that you remain engaged throughout. So I'll hand it back over to one of these fine gentlemen. Thank you.
So you see, the school board and the superintendent are creating a process that is about engaging the entire community. So you're not talking about something top down. Cambridge has been around for 20 or 30 years and have done over 1,000 strategic plans all across the country and some places across the world. So our process is rather consistent. The difference is when I became president about 10 years ago, was we use experienced superintendents who have been in the field, have been in the classrooms, and we try to not just do a plan, but we like to stick around and make sure we can implement it faithfully with progress data out there annually or even more, maybe even every 2 or 3 months. So we are looking at that. So excellent is not an accident. It has to come into intentions, and it has to have intelligent execution. And that's why, as we work with this track record and we're trying to talk about the process, we want to be able to use your website that's going to be documenting this process for the next several months and into next year. Because when you develop a plan, we come back and then we say, now what's the evidence that we've made progress? or are there other areas we need to have some help on? So when we talk about what we're going to do, we're going to describe the community, the strategic planning process. We're going to talk about the importance of what we will refer to as a triangle of support, and you'll find out what that means. We're going to talk about visualizing the hopes and dreams that you have for your children, and we're going to explain how you might be involved. First off, as far as we know, we have about 10 or 12 people online. I don't quite know how we're going to connect, but for yourselves, how many of you are parents? That's pretty important. How many of you work for the district? Tell me some other areas that you might, where you're coming from. You have parents, work for the district, you live in the community. School board? United Way. That's very important. And you're going to find, we're going to talk about this in a little bit. We would like you to be ambassadors as you know a little bit more about this, to share this with other people. So that when you share all of this and you know that what we're trying to do, now, the general question, the fact that you're here, you have an interest in finding out more. What do you expect as an outcome here? What do you think would be an outcome of a strategic planning process? Share vision, action. Share vision, have action, correct? Input. So when you talk about a plan, what would you say if the outcome is going to be that the strategic plan is going to become the umbrella for everything you do in this school district? It's for helping children learn. It's going to drive a budget. And it's going to give the school board and the superintendent in policy a direction that becomes the talking point of, if you're going to do something that's not in the plan, then you can vote it in. But if you want people to do things that are not in the plan, if it's not there, then we should be sticking to the plan. So it creates a consistent direction and continuity. You have a good school system. We have data and evidence, as we have observed, and we find out more that there are many excellent things happening. However, every system, and you're going to find the rationale for that, you need to still engage periodically in a process like this to get even better. And we'll create some of that context. Do we have any comments, Aaron, from anybody else that might be online?
Not yet, but I'll pause a minute to see if anyone wants to raise their hand. I think you're good.
Okay. I have a question. I'm going to ask you in your group to first talk with each other. What are the aspirations that you have for your children or your students in Ames Community Schools? Could you, among yourselves, talk about that? And then we'd like you to share out what are some of your thoughts.
Folks online to do the same thing.
Well, because we put it as a weapon, I can't send them right now. But I'm they can move
Anything you'd like for me to do?
You're not. Interesting. How I will.
We're going to give you another minute, but what we'd like to do is have each table maybe share what some of those aspirations might be.
And to our Zoom participants, if you would like to share, just raise your hand and I will make you able to speak in the room.
Okay, it looks like we're going to have a microphone at each table. And could someone from each table, maybe someone would like to share what your conversations were about aspirations? Who'd like to start?
I think somebody else here should talk. You really want me to talk? Yeah.
Sure. So that's the question, I guess.
Okay. So our group had a discussion. We kind of veered off. We started talking about our purpose statement, which I think there's been some discussion at the board about do we keep the purpose statement or not? There was consensus at the table here that everybody really likes the purpose statement, that it manages to express the hopes and aspirations for our children of everybody here at this table, I think, which is interesting. So
Okay.
it's the notion, I mean, there's discussion about providing an excellent education for every student, and that what this means for different students varies, and that we need to be sensitive both to the different needs of different students while also making opportunities available for everybody and closing gaps among different groups.
Okay, thank you. How about this table?
I'm spokesperson.
Hi, our team has a few things. We want our kiddos to feel enriched and feel like they belong. We want to have our learners and our kiddos engage in learning with continued joy, so that excitement they have to figure out and to know and to do doesn't peak at kindergarten. We want our kiddos to experience the diversity of humanity, and we want them to recognize, breathe into, feel into, experience emotionally, psychologically, physically, the excellence that comes from that, so that when they're out in the world and they're in environments that don't recognize that. They can recognize it for themselves because they'll realize it's very different than what success should look like. And then we also want our students to be situated so that they can thrive in whatever they choose to do.
Thank you very much. Did you notice you didn't say you wanted to increase the math scores by 5%? You want your students to express joy. You want them to be motivated. You want them to understand diversity and how everybody works together. So the point here is when you ask questions about what your aspirations might be, then you're going to also talk about the capacity of your present system. And can the capacity of your present system meet all of that? But are there ways that we can get even better? So when you talk about an aspiration, you're not talking about our goal, we're good, we're pretty happy the way we are. So when you get into strategic planning, it is the aspirations of trying to reach for something that you have yet to see, and then the organization that will end up creating and then implementing a strategic plan will no longer be the same organization. So you're trying to use this as the momentum that will take you to that. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Morgan, and we're trying to give you a context of how a lot of this fits in, that this is the first time many of you have heard this. But we're not going to be going away because this will be consistent throughout everything we do.
Good evening. My name is Frank Morgan. I'm a retired educator. I've worked in public schools in Virginia and South Carolina for 43 years. And during my 16 years as a superintendent, did a lot of work with strategic planning. So I'm really excited to spend time with you. I will say I have one connection that I didn't share with your board to Iowa. I forgot all about this. I went to high school with your former governor, Tom Vilsack. Okay, in Pittsburgh. He was 2 years ahead of me, played on the same football team with him, except we used to call him Tommy Vilsack, or his football nickname was TV. But anyway, it's nice to have some connection to Iowa. Why strategic planning? We just talked a lot about aspirations. And strategic planning is just about that. It's about aspirations. It's about thinking about things that you might not have thought of before. It's thinking about where we want our kids to be, what we want them to have, what we want them to gain from their education. The other part about strategic planning, though, that's really important, and I think it's going to be really important about this process, is that it's going to be done involving stakeholders in a very open and transparent way. Why is that important? Because at the end, we believe that that kind of plan will gain the most trust from the community, and it will engage the community more. And when you start talking about it being an umbrella for a budget in a couple of years, there'll be trust in the community that a lot of thought went into what you will be talking about. So the process here is as important as the product, in my opinion. The other reason you do strategic planning is to really look at how the status quo, or what parts of the status quo, aren't benefiting your kids anymore. There are things that we did 10 years ago that made perfect sense that we're still doing that may not make so much sense anymore. It will help you look at how you use resources. My favorite story as a superintendent doing a strategic plan was in the district in South Carolina. We were spending $1 million a year on alternative education, and everybody agreed that we weren't getting what we were paying for. So the strategic plan goal was that there would be a complete review of alternative education. And we came out with a really good plan that spent about the same amount of money. And that plan is still pretty much in place. So it's been tweaked a little bit, 5, 6 years later. So you're going to talk about how you use your resources, and that's really important. Now, you have a great infrastructure for strategic plan here because there's already been a lot of engagement and involvement. In fact, it's interesting. If you've not read Dr. Lawson's 100-day report, you should. It's on the website. One of the things it talks about is the need for the district to have a strategic direction. That's not atypical right now in school districts, because in school districts, we've just spent the last 2 years chasing our tails. for reasons that, aren't our fault. It's just what happened. So a lack of strategic direction is kind of a typical situation for districts to be in right now. So those are some reasons as you go into strategic planning. Let's see if I can do this right. All right. The triangle of support, Kevin mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of discussion in this country right now about school governance, who's in charge. The reality is the best schools and districts are ones that have a strong partnership involving home, school, and community. Parents and family members, the people that work for the school district and the school board, community organizations like the United Way and the faith community, and I could go on and on. But that triangle of support is where is what exists in the most successful school districts. Now, the strategic planning process we're about to go through is going to try to utilize that triangle of support to come up with a strong strategic plan. And again, I talked about infrastructure in this district. You have SIAC and you have the equity committee. And in fact, the equity statement, I guess, was passed at the board meeting I watched in December, I remember hearing a report about it, was done in a very inclusive way. All right. You have teaching and learning committees. You have lots of different committees here that are engaging the community. This school district does a really strong job of engagement. And I think incorporating that into the strategic plan is going to make it really, really strong. Again, we don't always walk into districts that have that kind of ethos. And this district has that ethos that I think values the triangle of support. Why now? There's really two big reasons. The changes wrought by the pandemic. I have a friend in South Carolina who finished his strategic plan and the board approved it in November 2019. What do you think that strategic plan was worth 6 months later? I mean, that's luck of the draw. The changes that the pandemic brought in terms of how instruction is delivered, all the ancillary services, recruitment, retention, whatever else, that is really an impetus for doing strategic planning now, as is a change in leadership. A new superintendent is a great time to do this because it is at a point where the community has been talking about the district's strengths and challenges and where it wants to go. Another good document was the summary by the search consultant that helped bring Dr. Lawson here. So a lot of really good stuff in there from the community about where it sees the district needing to go. So this is a great time because of the pandemic and the aftermath and all the things we've learned, and also because there's new leadership here. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, there it is. All right. A lot of what goes on during the strategic planning process is really going to focus on what came out of the pandemic. Where does school take place? There's kind of a blurring of the lines. It used to be school was school. Well, now school can take place in the back of your car on a laptop, and it did during the pandemic. Where does in-person instruction work? Where does virtual instruction work? Where does a hybrid work? Recruitment and retention of certificated and non-certificated people is a whole different ballgame now than it was 3 years ago. Ancillary services are a whole different ballgame than they were 3 years ago. I mean, we always talked about health services in the schools. We always have, but now that's an even more important topic. We've talked about counseling and mental health, but that's even more important now. We've talked about nutrition, but think of the role, maybe, a lot of districts in the country, your nutrition services were a lifeline during the pandemic and to some degree still are. So a lot of what's going to take place as we go through this discussion is what we've learned in the last 24 months, through hard experience. And again, the big one though is how the lines have blurred as far as where school can take place. So that's going to be a big part of our discussion. There's also a mindset issue here. Okay. There are 3 bullet points there that I'm not going to read to you. They're from a guy named Ron Edmonds. How did I lose that? Ron Edmonds was a researcher, a professor in Michigan. And in the 70s, and you'd say, well, it's the 70s. He looked at school districts in Michigan that had a lot of high-risk kids, high poverty, high-risk kids who were achieving at the same levels as kids in affluent suburbs. And he found out that these schools had certain characteristics, and there was no rocket science there. Strong instructional leadership, time on task and opportunity to learn, a safe and orderly environment, strong parent and family relationships, frequent monitoring of school process or school progress. No rocket science, but he found that having those, what he called correlates in place, led to great success in districts where, you know, you may not have expected that to happen. So his take was, we know what it takes to educate kids at a high level. The question is, do we have the will? Now, here's where the mindset piece comes in. In reading the superintendent's 100-day report and reading the stuff from the search consultant, two things popped out at me. One, there was a statement about we have the resources we need. And two, we want to do what's best for kids. So I think this district comes into this process with a really good mindset. And I think that's really, really important. Again, that's not always the case.
Your belief system drives why we're here. When you engage in strategic planning, you have a board and a superintendent that has the will to confront the reality of the fact that can we say we are successful with all students? There's not too many districts that can say that. And then the question, of course, is to measure what's the criteria of that success. Is it the high SAT scores, or is it students come home with joy in the learning that they had during that school day? The question in your belief system of knowing that there are things out there that you can still improve to get better, to not only talk about students that are marginalized, but your very most able students, that they also need to do something beyond just learning how to do a high grade on an ACT test or even any of the types of scores that we talk about. How do they become successful, productive adults? I have a daughter who graduated from University of Virginia just a couple years ago, and she got a job with Oracle in Austin, Texas. She goes to Austin, Texas, gets an apartment where she could walk to work, was all excited. 2 years later, she now lives in Northern Virginia. She never went into that office in Austin, Texas, because all of the learning she does is now online with all the customers she works. And to her dismay, she has to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because one of her customers is in India. So the school that she had in preparation and everything, now she goes into a different world. And there's certain things that she has to do to be self-sufficient, to go beyond the normal norms that many people have had when they've had more of the traditional jobs. So the world that we're preparing people for and the success that we have to have for independent learners are now stretching us to go beyond some of the metrics that we might have had in the past. The fact that we don't no longer have to just use the classroom. So the whole idea of your belief, the why that you want to do this to further prepare your students to live in the world that they're going to live and be successful, does take the type of consensus of ideas that we should have through this process. Now, the actual what of the process, this is what we're doing now. We're at readiness stage. We're trying to communicate and build participation and try to work with the board and the superintendent to have 25 or more people of which half are non-school based, working in a system. We want to have students. We want to have parents. We want to have community leaders. We want higher ed people. How we're going to get that group that's going to get together and try to work on this as a team, and we're building that participation. Then we're going to get into the design of the plan. Now, where's my clicker, Frank? Go ahead and click it. In this stage, we're going to have this steering committee, and we're looking for people that are twofers and threefers. People that might have children in the school system. They might have other relationships, maybe through a church, maybe through a chamber of commerce, maybe the ag community and the FFA and some of the other prominent organizations that you're going to have here in this community. And we're looking for people that have different hats because they're going to have influence beyond. We have at least 4 students are going to be here, and you're going to find that the students, when we have those meetings, we're going to be doing interviews and finding out what they think is happening in their schools, what they like and what they don't like. We're going to have this summit, which becomes more or less the kickoff of the beginning of the process that you're participating in. And you're going to know more about this when you leave than you did when you came. And we're figuring out a way to have you be ambassadors and engage people in the community. So this is the readiness stage. Next slide, please. So we're beginning to the point of understanding we're going to have a steering committee. You need to understand when we have a steering committee and we try to develop a mission statement, we try to develop objectives, we try to talk about strategies, we do not vote on anything. Everybody on the group has to agree to what becomes in the plan. When you have to do agreement, it takes a little bit longer, and into the point that everybody in figuring out what they can agree on, you're going to find common ground. It's important right now. There's a lot of divergent opinions, whether they be through politics, whether they be through where people are coming from. The issue is not to show where we're different as much as where do we agree and where are we together? Because there's good on all sides. And in that, we have to find that common area. And so we don't do a vote, we do an agreement. And then we develop a draft plan. Now, in the draft plan, next slide, please, we're going to have belief statement. We're going to have a mission statement. We're going to have parameters which set boundaries for expectations. We're going to create objectives that are going to start out each student will. The center of the strategic plan has to be about each student. It's not about the adults. It's not about the adults. There are too many things in too many school systems around this country, and you're not excluded, that sometimes things occur because of the convenience of the adults versus what's best for the children. Confronting that, that's where it takes courage and conviction. Because we don't want elephants in a room. And each school system is unique in talking about these types of issues. And you know, we're coming out of a lot of divisiveness that politically challenged everywhere in this country. But now we're past that. Now we're back to saying, we got everybody back in school. How do we recover to figure out if we have gaps, how we're going to move forward? So we don't have to worry about that at this point. We now have to talk about moving forward. And we're going to have strategies. And you see that blue area? Those are the areas that the strategic planning team is going to create a draft. And after you have an area, the yellow area, That's going to be action teams that will actually do roadmaps of what you're going to have to do to achieve the aspirations that you're talking about in your mission statement. That group of people, and people can get involved, might be 10 to 20 people working over a period of 2 or 3 months to develop action plans, which get into more specific, more reality. And they will do research and development to compare this school system to systems not just in Iowa, but across the country, across the world. The fact that you have people engaging in this and doing hours and hours of work doesn't occur when you go from school year to school year. The investment in time and commitment become unique through this process to reach the point of doing something that's going to transform an already pretty good school system into a system that will be better. Next slide, please. The idea in the end, though, is going to have to come back to the school board. So the strategic planning team will have a plan that they send to the school board, and then it's up to the school board and the superintendent to hopefully accept that plan or make certain modifications. And then after this year, which is a planning year, so we're talking all about January to May, next year is implementation. And when you get into implementation and you have these objectives and strategies, during board meetings, evidence of progress towards that or how this impacts your budget will then be the reality of the strategic plan being the umbrella. The school system presently doesn't have a strategic plan. Question is, if you have one, it's how you use it. Now, this doesn't mean that the school system isn't moving forward and doing a lot of good things, but now the continuity that this can provide and get to the point into adoption and implementation, everything that you try to want to do to create this strategic direction, if you look at the 100-day report, if you look at the evidence that we're going to share with you that we had when the company came in and hired and gave, I guess, advice to the board in hiring the superintendent, talked about a gap here that we could probably do a little bit better, as a lot of systems can. Next slide, please. At this point, you have the QRI code there. And we also, and I will have to say, I guess I will have to confess to being a little more old school. We have these questions we'd like to ask for you. Now, all this information, and the reason we want to take advantage of the QRI code is because we can collect this information for people that are in the joining us tonight online, but also when people go to the website, they also can enter this information and we can record it. And so all of a sudden, instead of having the 25 people or so in the room, we're going to have access to a whole lot of other information from other people that could inform those decisions and those thinking. So what I'd like you to do, if we go to the next slide, please. I want you to do this now. Excuse me. What did you just say? Go back, please. Do me a favor. You have the QRI code. You have those 3 questions. I'd like you in your groups right now. You can see what the questions are. Why don't you talk about them? And then we're going to ask you to report back out. We're also asking you to do 2 things. If you want to write and use the QRI code, great. If you want to do it the old-fashioned way, go ahead and write them down. Now, the old-fashioned way, there's one thing you can do. If you want to be involved in this process, and you want to be either on the strategic planning team or on one of the action teams, if you choose, you can put your name and say, I want to be involved, so that maybe then the system could maybe contact you. The fact that you're taking the time to be here this evening is showing that you have that interest. So among yourselves, let's take about 10 minutes to look at those questions, and either you can input it on the QR code, which is probably the best, or you can do it the old fashioned way and we'll take that. And again, we're going to take about 10 minutes for you to have this discussion. And you can see what the questions are. You're talking about what are some of the highest aspirations? What are 3 things that you should continue? What are 2 things that you should stop? And what is something maybe new you could start? So can we take about 10 minutes, please? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Again, if you are on Zoom and you would like to share, have your voice heard in the room, don't forget you can raise your hand. I'm happy to put you on in the room.
Okay, we're going to ask, ooh, geez, gotta be careful of that. We're going to ask both tables to report out and then see if we get some feedback from our folks that are online. Who will be the spokesman here or spokesperson here?
We haven't covered everybody, but
Sure.
So some aspirations, we've kind of gone over that already.
Sure.
So 3 things we'd like to see, the extracurricular activities. We feel there's a lot of different types, varieties. We feel that's going well.
Mhm.
Also the focus on mental health for kids. Some things we'd like to see stopped. We'd like to see some accountability for discipline. If a child breaks the rule, there should be consequences. We'd like to see transparency in that, that nobody's turning an eye on it at all buildings and levels. Yeah, a lack of safety. What we think should be added. I'd like to see more professional development for the teachers in order to implement the programs with fidelity. Yeah, that's what we came up with.
Any other feedback from this table?
I would add one thing that needs to be added. It's more parental involvement.
Okay.
I guess one thing I'm still in the process of learning and would be, I think we have some really nice, wonderful objectives. And if we have infinite number of teachers, infinite resource, I think those will be all accomplished, can be accomplished. But the reality is likely that there's going to be constraint whenever you have a class more than 2 students, unless you have just 1 student, because every student is different. The challenge is actually how to make those balance. So I think make that decision well, especially at the policy level, it's going to be also very important, but also challenging. For maybe that's something we can work on probably as a community with everyone involved. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else here? Oh, your mic. How about the other table? Why don't you spin it and see it?
So my colleagues at this table filled it out online and then didn't share all their ideas with me. So what I'm going to say is going to be my ideas alone, and I do not represent those of my table. Disclaimer. I don't want to get in trouble later. I will just say one thing that I think we should keep doing is I think we should keep seeking community and informal learning partnerships for our kiddos at all levels, pre-K through 12. I would love to see what we already have continue. I think we're on a good, I think we have a good start. Let's just keep going. something I think we should stop is we should stop the increasing trend that seems to be happening with using standardized or traditional measures of excellence to evaluate our learners and their successes. That just makes me a little nervous at the trend that that's going. So if we could slow that down or start to reduce it, that'd be great. The one thing I think we should start is I think we should start moving some of our feedback to parents to be more learning goal focused, not just in the elementary, but at the middle school and high school levels. It's really hard as a parent to help your child make good decision making as a learner when you're not even sure what the goal was.
Any other feedback from the table?
Yeah, let's go.
I would just say, in my own, I was a teacher for 6 years, and I feel like oftentimes schools, and when you're in the classroom situation, you can feel very like it's all on you. Like the school has to take everything on. And one thing in my new role that I find is good and should continue with Ames Community Schools is the willingness and the eagerness to work with the community and the groups and nonprofits and organizations that are out there so willing to jump in and help and provide wraparound services. So yeah, I would say that that's a positive that I see that I think is good to continue.
I heard a comment about talking about going beyond traditional ways of recognizing success. Let me give you an example. Every year when you have your graduation, you have the top 10% have the gold honor cords. That's fine. Where are we recognizing the success of other students in other ways that they can perform, whether it be through your ag work or whether it be through arts or any of the other types of things? How do we balance that recognition that we don't just talk about how smart a kid is, but how is that child smart? When you're doing that, and anytime someone is recognized for excellence through their own abilities, how do you think that person leaves when they go on to the next step in their life? So certain things like this, you might get into some of these conversations and you go beyond not for the fact that what you're doing isn't okay, but what else can we do more that's going to show how we're recognizing all children? So when you say all, shouldn't they all find some way to have that recognition or that portfolio? Now, you've taken the time in a few minutes to address this. Over 1,000 people on a survey and over 200 people during the superintendent's search, this is what they came up with. So this data also happened a year ago. What are 3 things could you continue? Tradition of academic excellence. Top quality teachers and staff. Abundant resources for learning. What are some things that you should see stop? Community divisiveness on issues. A lot of that I think we're past, but we still have to be mindful in the civility of how we might share some of that a lot of areas are still working on. Disregard for school procedures. Now, I don't know exactly, those are the types of things that group's going to say, well, what does this mean? Maybe it's a question we might want to ask the students. So we just wanted to share that there's some other existing data from a large number of people that now your data is going to be added to that. And we hope that we're going to have some addition. Is there another slide on that, Frank? Okay. How about this one? One thing we need to start or added, a strategic plan. That came from that group. And so that again validates part of what we're doing here. Next slide, please, Frank. So here we are in January during the readiness stage, the summit today. Then we're going to come back and we're going to be here January 30th, 31st, and February 1st, 3 full days, 8-hour days. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have the kickoff with action teams. It's going to involve at least 100 people. We're going to have the second meeting in April, and then it's going to come to the board. This is, again, going to be on the website. You're seeing how this process works. This is the what. Next slide, please. And the implementation the next year. What we do at the end of next year, we will come back and we will then ask the staff to give evidence of what have you done during your implementation year. What evidence do you have that you've moved forward to a new direction? So what's your work now? This is just the beginning of something that's going to continue and have many different layers. We'd like you to share some of this information with others. Maybe they also could direct and give some of their thoughts. We'd like you to consider to participate, and if you give it your name, then we have your name that we can make sure we might include you on the action planning work. We'd like to get to the point that you will hold the board and the superintendent accountable for the implementation of this plan. There has to be accountability. Now, their intention is they have every intention of being accountable, and they have every intention in so doing that it's not going to be a top-down process. It's back to that stakeholder involved process. And we'd like to be able to say, if we were going to come back a year from now, we could celebrate some success, how this is all going to make this system go beyond to wherever we are now to fulfill some of the aspirations that we discussed here. Next slide, please. The whole idea, when we get done with this process, we're going to probably have several hundred people involved. We're going to have 2,000 to 3,000 hours. 2,000 to 3,000 hours of people with goodwill trying to work for this school system to make it better for the children. So this is where we're talking about the whole collaborative effort. Next slide, please. I'd like to end on this one. John Dewey was around in the late 1800s, but his concept creates the belief and the values of what the best and wisest parents want for their child. So should we want for all our children. So the success of a strategic plan isn't for this group or that group. When you say all, we have to be mindful, not just where we're being successful, where are the gaps that we need to get better for whatever group of students that might be. And that has to be how we work to find that common good, to take the courage to ask some of the tough questions, whether it be the success of your ESOL students, your special ed students, for people that might have issues where they have mental health issues. For how do you get all families and parents to be involved in ways that maybe they haven't up to this time. The beauty of this, in this size of a district, is it's more doable. So you're talking about 5,000 kids. You're not talking about a system that's 90,000. So you're going to know each other. So if we can get to the point that this becomes cultural setting, that this plan drives what we're trying to do and creates the expectations for trying to help all children, then the system could be a better system. And because of you being here this evening and the people we have online, this is just the start of this conversation that's not going to go away. We're not going to let that happen. And so I hope you're going to be along for watching how this thing unfolds. I've done this more than a few times, and I have to say that I'm very proud of how a district uniquely develops their plan for their children. And we're going to make this work. You're going to make this work, and we're going to help you in every way possible. So thank you for being here this evening. Dr. Lawson, do you have anything you'd like to say in the end?
So first, if we could just give Frank and Kevin a quick round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us. I'd like to acknowledge our awesome board members who came out to support us this evening, Michelle Linkaitis and Amy Erica Smith. Thank you so much. Thank you, parents. And thank you to the awesome ACSD staff members for hanging around this evening and providing your support. I don't know if you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns for either of the two gentlemen that are here this evening. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious whether it's possible to maybe have the school communicate with maybe students, parents to encourage them to participate in the providing feedback, and also I guess as we organize the steering committee or whatever other volunteering opportunities, would be possible to share some information about things such as expected time commitment so that people can make a judgment, make sure they can do a good job when they sign up for something?
Absolutely. So we have district facilitators, Director Aaron Miller and Dr. Jeff Hawkins. And so we'll have them to coordinate with Amy around communicating to our community for volunteers, and they'll also share out the time commitment of those volunteer activities for you to help plan. Thank you. Is there anything additional? Questions, comments, concerns? Nothing. Well, I think that does it. Again, thank you all so much for coming out. Have a safe evening. Nice ride home.
Are you all thinking?
Thanks for joining us online. If you have any questions, I'll stick around. You're welcome to raise your hand and I can answer any questions you might have.